Some of you guys might know that Donald Trump this week signed an executive order supposedly weakening the Johnson Amendment, which keeps keeps clergy from actually endorsing politicians in the pulpit. But he kind of didn't. So bear with me here for a second. This comes from the Friendly Atheist blog at Pathos. Had he actually had done this, churches would have the ability to endorse candidates from the pulpit without losing their tax-exempt status. Though it's worth noting that even with the Johnson Amendment in place now, the IRS has not punished churches for playing politics, even when the pastors were practically bragging about it. So we've not really been enforcing it as much as we can because guess one of the favorite things for the Republicans to slash when they get into office? Hey, it's federal employees, and one of the biggest ones happens to be the IRS. So the executive order that he signed wasn't supposed to codify the inaction, but it was telling the IRS to back off churches who got involved and act in that kind of stuff. So, not shortly after he signed it, two important things happened. And first of all, the religious conservatives were quick to complain that the executive order didn't actually do anything, which is true. It didn't repeal the Johnson Amendment, since, only Congress can do that. And it was mostly telling Trump telling the IRS to keep what it's doing what it's doing already, which is pretty much nothing. Sad to say, but it's an executive order without any balls. And the order didn't have anything to say about faith-based discrimination, because that's exactly what it is. Christians were hoping that Trump would give them permission to avoid doing business with LGBT customers, like the bakers and the florists and the photographers that won't work with same-sex couples because it violates their religion, I believe, whatever the fuck they want to believe there. It just, they want the right to discriminate legally. And thankfully, we're still a nation of laws, and they're not allowed to do that. So, what else happened, the second significant thing, is that the FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, filed a lawsuit against Trump saying that his order discriminated against atheists. Their argument was that Trump was giving churches a green light to play politics since he was telling the IRS to back off. But since that same policy doesn't apply to non-profit groups that cater to atheists, that was a constitutional violation. And FFRF doesn't usually jump into lawsuits unless they think they have a pretty good chance of winning. So here's the press release from them. The Freedom from Religion Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, contends that Trump is violating its equal protection rights and favoring church groups over secular groups in violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Trump has directed the IRS to do something for which they both lack any enumerated or implied power, to selectively enforce a legitimate statute based solely on religion. Trump is communicating to churches that his administration will not enforce the Johnson Amendment, says Gaylor. The IRS needs clear direction that it must enforce the law equally. So here's the great thing about this. If the lawsuit is allowed to go forward, the FFRF is making a compelling case. Of course, this executive order singles out religious institutions, giving them permission to break the law. That's exactly what this order says. So how do you defend against something like that if you're the government's lawyers? You can't pretend that the executive order doesn't exempt those who talk about, quote, moral or political issues from a religious perspective, since that's exactly what the order says. The only alternative is to admit the executive order doesn't do the very thing that Trump said that it would do. And that's going to put them into another fucking corner, because if the people from the churches think that he doesn't have their back, is essentially a feckless president, which we kind of know is already happening. So, but earlier this year, he promised that I will get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment and allow our representatives of faith to speak freely without fear of retribution. So the executive order was supposedly going to be all about stopping the IRS from revoking a church's nonprofit exempt status if it chooses to support a political cause. And then Trump lied at the signing ceremony when he said, "This financial threat against the faith community is over. I will be signing an executive order to follow through on that pledge and to prevent the Johnson Amendment from interfering with your First Amendment rights." So this, again, puts him into a hole. The FFRF suit now includes the obligatory catalog of every tweet and statement Trump has ever made about the Johnson Amendment that would have made such changes unconstitutional had he enacted them. Should this lawsuit be allowed to proceed, it will all but force the Justice Department lawyers to stand before a judge and explain that the executive order, as signed, achieves none of these goals and in fact does little more than to codify the status quo. So really, do we want to know, does it do what Trump says it does, which in that case it'll be illegal because it's against the Establishment Clause, or does it do nothing, which makes Trump even more of a liar and hopefully loses a lot of that Christian base that he has? Either way, he's fucked, and I can't wait for all the fallout to happen because of it, because he is one of the most feckless leaders I have ever experienced as a citizen of this country.
Galaxy.